Right. I mean, I think the U.S. has a history of working with dictators. You know, Pinochet, for example. There's there's a view among some people in the U.S. that's been around for a long time that if there's a dictator, but then that dictator is aligned with American interests, then it's to America's advantage to work with them. I personally don't agree with that. I think that's also stupid. But to your point, if this dictatorship that we're working with is, I mean, in China's case, their core values are kill people and take their stuff. So that should just be a really big red flag that I guess we just haven't been seeing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. Throughout our history, there has been this marked tendency to cooperate with dictatorships if it's a means to a better end or a hoped for better end, right? We'd cooperate with, a small, unthreatening dictatorship in order to go after the main adversary. That was kind of a feature of the Cold War. It did not always work very well for us. And I agree with you, man. I don't think it's going to work very well for us today if we start to get in a lot of close relationships with with other dictatorships in the hopes that by collaborating and cooperating, we can, turn them to, bend them to our, our desired end state of competing with the People's Republic of China. But what's really bizarre is when you actually try to cooperate with your strategic rival. If this is the second Cold War, this constant desire to cooperate with Beijing in any way we can and to maintain this high level diplomacy, even though they're constantly rejecting it. And even though when the moments of crisis come, they don't answer the phone, but yet we're still trying to establish hotlines. It's not clear why we do that.
I think it's pretty clear. I mean, think about it. There's 1 billion people in China. Have you thought about how much money we could make if we sell stuff there?
You know what? I have not thought about that. No, it's never.
A lot of people who could buy your book, Ian.
I should have gone back and talked to the editors about this. We could have done a very different rewrite and then published it for the China market. No, I mean, that's exactly it, right? I mean, this is what...
But that's not even far-fetched. People do that.
Yeah, I know people do that all the time. And this is what's driven so much of our policy towards China, especially after the Tiananmen Square massacre and after the fall of the Soviet Union, where we no longer needed the CCP as, a card to play against the Soviets. What we needed was market access. And it was that greed. It was that fundamental greed that drove so much of our policy. And I think to this day continues to drive so much of our policy. And the problem is that more often than not, that greed actually, it overtakes our fundamental national interests. And it certainly undermines a lot of the principles and values that we espouse.
Now, do you think that's what's happening with the Biden administration? Because Biden himself, in this same week, called Xi Jinping a dictator. He's also said that the U.S. would defend Taiwan if China invades, so that got walked back by his administration. So what do you think is going on with how the administration is trying to tackle China?
I suspect what we're seeing is a debate, that there's this debate that is playing out within the halls of power in Washington, D.C. And as far as I can tell, this is just a guess, President Biden is the good guy. I mean, he's the guy that if you had him on China Uncensored or China Unscripted, he would be agreeing with us. He has said a lot of very candid and honest things about China, about Xi Jinping, and about what the United States stands for. I was amazed not only to hear him on 4 occasions say that the United States would defend Taiwan, but what he also said that no other president has said in 40 plus years, since 1979, when we established diplomatic relations with Beijing. What he also said is that the future of Taiwan is for the people of Taiwan to decide for themselves. In other words, that he believes in popular sovereignty and self-determination. That is something that no other government that I'm aware of in our country or in other countries around the world have actually said out loud publicly. I thought that was a really big deal.
Well, now in this trip, Blinken did emphasize that the U.S. does not support Taiwan independence. I mean, that's basically in line with every other U.S. administration. But how do you think that jives with what Biden has said? Do you think China feels something has changed with the U.S.-Taiwan relationship?
Well, I think what the Secretary of State said is contrary to what our president has said.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, these are very different ideas. The idea that we oppose Taiwanese independence is the exact opposite of the future of Taiwan is for the people of Taiwan to decide for themselves, that they have agency, that they're independent actors, and that their political futures, their fate or their destiny is for them to decide. That's always been the bedrock of American domestic policy. I mean, it's written in our Declaration of Independence, our Constitution. The idea of self-determination is also the principal tenet of the United Nations Charter. And so it has always struck me as very odd that when it comes to Taiwan, or the Republic of China, its official name, that when it comes to this country, in order to maintain some kind of smooth working relationship with Beijing, Matt, to your point, in order to have access to the 1.3 or 4 mythical billion customers that, of course, we'll never get access to, that we're willing to compromise on this bedrock principle. And again, so I think what the Secretary of State said is out of line with that idea, although it is certainly in line with the tradition, the history of the way we've approached this issue. And it's one that's gotten us into, I think, a very dangerous place and needs to be rethought. And it's a policy that needs to be reformed. And again, I think this is why it's so wonderful to hear President Biden himself say that, he supports Taiwanese independence, because what is Taiwanese independence? That's what it is. It's self-determination. It's for the people of Taiwan to decide for themselves. It doesn't mean we support a particular end state for Taiwan or a particular identity or political party in Taiwan. It means that we don't have an opinion. We respect democracy. And it's not Taiwan's democracy that's the problem. It's the Chinese Communist Party's ambitions and its approach towards Taiwan, this very coercive approach. That's the problem.
Well, it's interesting you say that, because after Biden called Xi a dictator, there was a lot of talk about how, that kind of ruined the thaw in the U.S.-China relations that Blinken was trying to do, that, now China was angry. And it just seems to me like China is perpetually angry.
Well, wouldn't you be angry too, Chris? I mean, it is kind of a slave state. This is a country that's committing genocide. It provides no fundamental freedoms whatsoever for any of the subjects of the CCP. There's no rule of law. Whatever the party says goes, and of course, whatever the dictator or the general secretary Xi Jinping says, that's what the party says. I mean, here's a country that it has embraced such a radical Marxist-Leninist governance model that you have school children actually learning Xi Jinping thought, that this is part of the curriculum for kids in China. And it goes all the way up to the grad school level. You can now get a PhD in China in Xi Jinping thought. And what is Xi Jinping thought? If you read any of these textbooks, it's Marxism. It's 21st century Marxism. That's what it says on the opening pages of all these books. And I know because I've read them for research.
I'm sorry.
I feel sorry for myself sometimes. I appreciate your sympathy, Chris. I think I deserve it. It is. But in all seriousness, it is bizarre to read. It's hard reading. And one of the reasons it's hard reading is because it is so bizarre. And at first it seems faintly ridiculous that anybody would take this stuff seriously in the 21st century. But then you realize, oh my goodness, they do take this stuff seriously. This is very dangerous.
I mean, at first it seems kind of amusing that you can get a PhD in Xi Jinping thought. But then it, it basically speaks to, I think, how the Chinese Communist Party takes itself so seriously that it can easily push past the point of ridiculousness uh, into like a sort of deep-seated brutality.
Well, it is certainly a very brutal regime. And I think you would have to have that level of brutality to maintain anything as fanatical and as extremist as that particular ideology. And I think we forget that. I think it's very easy for us in the United States or in the West more generally to forget the importance of ideology and to assume that the way we see the world is the way others see the world. And that's certainly not the case when it comes to Xi Jinping or the Chinese Communist Party elite. They are very, very ideological. They may be more ideological than North Korea.
Yeah, this is, when the Antony Blinken talks about China, he doesn't really talk about the PRC ideologically, the Communist Party ideologically, which is a big difference from his predecessor, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, who had on many occasions talked about the sort of ideological differences and the ideological struggle between the US and China. Is that important to talk about publicly, or is it enough to just kind of understand it?
I think it's very important to talk about publicly. And I think we're deluding ourselves and we're misinforming not only American policy, but the American people more broadly by downplaying the role that ideology plays. I mean, the fact of the matter is, and I can say this having spent years and years and years of doing this research, I think it's an empirical fact that we are in a war of ideas with the Chinese Communist Party. I suspect you guys would agree with that, right? I mean, this is just a fact. All the data points in that direction. All the research points in that direction. All you have to do is read what Xi Jinping writes and what other CCP high officials write, listen to what they say, and then watch what they do, how they spend their money and how they act on the world stage. They are seeking to undermine liberal democracy, including in our own country. They've done it very successfully in their country. And it is a war of ideas. And if we don't acknowledge that and get in the fight as a country, then I think we're going to continue to lose ground.